Stop what you're doing. I need 27 minutes of your attention, not because I'm going to entertain you, because by the time this video ends, you are going to understand something that your government has decided you don't need to know. Something that a small group of scientists, engineers, and intelligence officials are sitting with right now in classified briefing rooms, while the rest of the world scrolls through their feed completely unaware. 3 days ago, NASA activated a protocol that has been sealed since 1972, a contingency plan so sensitive that the majority of active NASA personnel have never heard its name, a plan that was written in secret, used once, buried, and designed never to be needed again. Its name is CSEP, and the thing that forced them to break it open after 52 years of silence is 3I Atlas. I've spent the last 11 days going through everything: the leaked internal memos, the redacted FOIA documents, the anonymous testimonies from researchers inside JPL, ESA, and the SETI Institute, the historical record going back to 1969, and what I found connects dots that run so deep that I had to stop and ask myself whether I was ready to put this on camera. I am. Let's go. Before we get into the protocol, I need to address something. There are dozens of videos about 3I Atlas on this platform right now, and most of them are making the same mistake. They're treating this like a news story. They're giving you the headlines without giving you the architecture underneath. This is not a news story. This is a slowly unfolding sequence of events that has been building for longer than most people realize. To understand what CSEP being activated actually means, you need the full context, the history, the precedents, the pattern. And here's what frustrates me about how this is being covered. The focus keeps landing on the spectacle, the object, the trajectory, the pretty telescope images. Nobody is asking the harder question: why now? Why, after 52 years of this protocol sitting dormant, did this specific object trigger it? What is it about 3I Atlas that crossed the threshold that Oumuamua didn't cross, that Borisov didn't cross, that thousands of other anomalous detections over 5 decades didn't cross? That's the question I've been trying to answer, and the answer, I think, is the signal. So that's what we're going to build today. From the ground up, let's start with the object itself. 3I Atlas was first detected on March 3, 2025 by the Atlas Telescope Network in Hawaii. Within 48 hours, observatories on 4 continents had independently confirmed the sighting. That speed of confirmation is almost without precedent for a newly detected interstellar object. It tells you that whatever this thing is, it was unusual enough to demand immediate global attention. The object is traveling at approximately 67 kilometers per second relative to the Sunday the New Horizons probe, the fastest spacecraft humanity has ever launched, travels at about 14 kilometers per second. 3I Atlas is moving at nearly 5 times that speed, and it originated from outside the solar system entirely. We've seen interstellar objects before: Oumuamua in 2017, Borisov in 2019, but both of them were, at their core, passive. They came in, flew by, and left. They didn't do anything. 3I Atlas is doing things. First, its composition. Spectroscopic data from the ESO's Very Large Telescope shows a molecular arrangement with no natural analog in any database on Earth. The spectral signature contains elemental combinations arranged in a geometric pattern at the molecular level. When scientists describe molecular geometry as geometric, that is a statement about intentional structure. Second, its movement. 3I Atlas has altered its velocity 3 separate times since detection, not because of gravitational influence from any body in our solar system. The trajectory models rule that out. It decelerated, accelerated, then made what three independent astrophysicists described as a micro-correction, a precise angular adjustment with no passive physical explanation. Objects in space don't steer themselves, unless something is steering them. Third, its size. Early photometric estimates suggest 3I, Atlas is significantly larger than either Oumuamua or Borisov. We're not talking about a fragment or a small probe. We're talking about something with substantial mass. Something built, if it was built, at a scale that makes our largest spacecraft look like paper clips. And fourth, the signal, which we'll come to shortly. The year is 1969. The United States has just put men on the moon. And behind the celebration, in very small rooms, a very different conversation is happening. The people in those rooms are planners, risk assessors, people whose job is to ask the question nobody wants to ask out loud, what if we're not alone, and what if whatever else is out there decides to make itself known? This wasn't fringe thinking. This was policy-level contingency planning, the same kind of framework thinking that produced nuclear response protocols. The logic was simple. If you're serious about space exploration, you have to be serious about the possibility of contact. And if you're serious about contact, you need a plan. CSEP Cosmic Signal Emergency Procedure was that plan. Drafted by a joint working group including senior figures from NASA, the Department of Defense, and the NSA. Their meetings were held off-calendar. Their documents were classified above top secret. CSEP had three functions. First, data centralization. All anomalous signal data routed through a single classified command structure. Second, communication suspension. NASA's Public Affairs Office legally restricted from making any statement about the relevant object without approval from a joint civilian-military review board. Third, executive escalation. Automatic mandatory briefings for the NASA Administrator, Secretary of Defense, Director of National Intelligence, and the President of the United States every 24 hours until deactivation. The moment CSEP goes active, the President is receiving daily briefings on whatever triggered it. Whatever is in those briefings right now about 3I, Atlas, about the signal, about the trajectory corrections the President knows, and you don't. Now here's something that very few people know about CSEP. There was a fourth function that was added in 1971, 2 years after the original framework was drafted. A function that was pushed for by a small group within the NSA who argued that the original three functions weren't enough. That fourth function is called the counter-narrative directive. Under it, if CSEP is active and information about the triggering object begins circulating in public channels, news media, academic publications, independent researchers, a designated team within NASA's Communications Division is authorized to introduce alternative explanations into the public discourse. Not lies, technically. Reframings, emphasizing natural explanations, downplaying anomalies, directing media attention toward less sensitive aspects of the object. In other words, officially sanctioned narrative management, built into the protocol from 1971 onward. Think about that the next time you see a mainstream science outlet publishing a piece about how 3I, Atlas, is probably just an unusual comet. CSEP was completed in 1969, updated in 1971, and for 3 years, nothing triggered it, until Apollo 17. Apollo 17, launched on December 7, 1972. Commander Eugene Cernan, geologist Harrison Schmitt, pilot Ronald Evans, the sixth and final crewed lunar landing, a geological mission. Supposed to be routine, on December 13th, Cernan and Schmidt were on the lunar surface conducting their final EVA. At some point during that EVA, something changed. Cernan kept a personal journal throughout his life. Portions were shared with a biographer before his death in 2017. The biographer has described a passage where Cernan writes about hearing something in his communication system that was not mission control, a repeating pattern, consistent intervals. He described it as mathematical, not static, not equipment noise, a pattern. He reported it to Houston. He was told they'd log it and to continue the EVA. That exchange is not in the official transcript. What is in the transcript is a 4-minute gap attributed to a technical recording anomaly. In 2019, a FOIA request for documents related to anomalous signal detections during the Apollo program returned 34 pages, 31 of which were fully redacted. In the remaining 3 pages was a reference to a monitoring station in Honeysuckle Creek, Australia, detecting a low-frequency signal on December 13, 1972, originating from beyond the solar system, pulsing at regular intervals. A retired signals analyst who worked at a facility connected to the Apollo ground network described being briefed on that detection. He said the signal pulsed, in his words, like a clock, every 17 seconds. CSEP was activated within 6 hours. The signal continued for 9 days, then stopped. CSEP was deactivated. The file was sealed under the classification designation Sigma 7, and for 52 years, as far as the public record was concerned, nothing had happened. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The most significant anomalous detection in the history of the space program. A signal from beyond the solar system, received by human beings standing on the surface of the moon. And for 52 years, the world didn't know until 3 days ago. Approximately 19 days after initial detection, NASA's Deep Space Network began registering an anomalous low-frequency emission coming from the direction of 3I Atlas. Low frequency is important. Low-frequency signals degrade slowly over vast distances. They travel through interference that destroys higher-frequency signals. If you were designing a signal to be received across interstellar distances, you would use low frequency. That's not coincidence. That's engineering logic. The emission pulses every 17 seconds, without deviation, without drift, for 19 consecutive days. 3I Atlas is not a pulsar. It doesn't have the mass, the rotation signature, or the electromagnetic profile of a neutron star. There is no known natural mechanism within an object of its apparent size and composition that could produce a signal this precise and this sustained. Researchers at the SETI Institute analyzing the emission described it in leaked correspondence as structured in a way that suggests information encoding, not noise, not resonance, information encoding. There may be a message inside the pulse pattern we haven't decoded yet. Now, some scientists in the public conversation have suggested that the 1-7-second interval could be explained by a natural resonance within the object structure, a kind of internal vibration producing a regular electromagnetic output. I want to address that directly because it sounds plausible until you look at the numbers. For a natural resonance to produce a signal this clean and this consistent for 19 days, the object would need to have an internal structure of extraordinary uniformity and stability. No natural space object has ever demonstrated that kind of structural consistency. And even if we accepted the resonance hypothesis, It still doesn't explain why the frequency exactly matches a classified detection from 1972. Natural resonances are not conserved across interstellar travel. They would shift, they would drift, they would degrade. This one hasn't. The signal from 3I Atlas pulses every 17 seconds. The signal detected near the Moon in December 1972 pulsed every 17 seconds. The same interval, across 52 years, from an object that originated outside our solar system. Either that's the most extraordinary coincidence in the history of science, or it's the same source, checking back in. Silence, when it comes from institutions that normally can't stop talking, is data. NASA's 3I Atlas tracking page hasn't been updated in 11 days. In that same period, NASA held 4 press conferences on other topics. They are fully operational. They are simply not talking about this. ESA last updated its tracking information 11 days ago and has been silent since. China's CNSA held a closed meeting of its most senior astrophysicists on February 20th with no published summary. The UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space moved a March session to an emergency convening on 72 hours' notice, with a restricted attendance level applied only twice before in the committee's history. The U.S. Air Force's 18th Space Control Squadron quietly moved into a heightened monitoring posture on February 22nd. All of this in a 5-day window. All of it following confirmation of the signal. None of it announced. None of it explained. That is not incompetence. That is coordination. Multiple institutions, multiple countries, choosing silence simultaneously. That requires communication. That requires agreement. And it requires something significant enough to make governments that usually compete with each other act as one. And here's the detail that I keep coming back to. The 18th Space Control Squadron's primary mandate is tracking objects that could pose a threat to assets in Earth orbit. Satellites, space stations, infrastructure. That's their job. They monitor things that are getting close. The fact that they've expanded their sensor coverage and extended their operational tempo means someone has tasked them with watching 3I Atlas more carefully than a distant interstellar flyby would normally require. Someone thinks it's getting close enough to matter. Dr. Avi Loeb, former chair of Harvard's astronomy department, has stated publicly that 3I Atlas displays multiple characteristics inconsistent with natural origin. He has called for access to the full tracking data. That access has not been granted. A Harvard professor of astrophysics is being told no. A researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Extraterrestrial Physics told a German publication that 3I Atlas's trajectory corrections are statistically impossible to attribute to known physical forces. Not unlikely. Impossible. A 30-year JPL veteran who worked on the Voyager program heard that CSEP had been activated and said, immediately, "Then it's real." After 3 decades inside NASA's most advanced facility, that was his first reaction. Not curiosity, confirmation. A radio astronomer in the Netherlands, 22 years of experience analyzing space signals, described the 1-7-second pulse interval as too clean to be natural. She said she has never seen anything that regular that wasn't man-made. And this, she said, is not man-made. 4 researchers, 4 institutions, 4 countries. The same conclusion. But here's what I find most telling. None of these people are publishing. Loeb has spoken publicly, but hasn't submitted a paper. The Max Planck researchers spoke anonymously. The JPL engineer gave an interview to an independent podcast with a small audience. The Dutch astronomer shared her analysis in a private message that was later leaked. These are people who have spent their careers building institutional credibility, publishing in peer-reviewed journals, operating within the system. And right now, not one of them is putting their name on a formal paper about 3I Atlas. That tells you something about what they think would happen if they did. In 2021, Harvard researchers analyzing historical telescope data found evidence of an interstellar object that passed through our solar system in 2006, 11 years before Oumuamua. When they modeled its trajectory, the path of entry and exit were not symmetric the way passive gravitational flyby physics predicts. The data suggests a direction change, a correction. The object was never named, never announced. It sits as a file number in the Minor Planet Center archives. 2006, unnamed object. Possible trajectory correction, no comment. 2017, Oumuamua, anomalous shape, unexplained acceleration. Harvard suggests artificial origin. Establishment dismisses it. 2019, Borisov, unusual composition. Interest fades. 2025, 3I, Atlas, everything, all at once. 4 objects, each more anomalous than the last, each generating less official explanation than the one before. A pattern of escalating strangeness met with escalating silence. And here's the question I want you to hold. If you were sending probes to survey a solar system, how would you do it? You'd probably start cautiously. Send something small, fast, hard to detect. See if anything responds. If nothing responds, send something slightly more visible. See if they notice. If they notice but don't respond, send something bigger, something that makes a sound, something that's harder to ignore. I'm not saying that's what's happening. I'm saying that if it were happening, the sequence we've observed over the past 19 years would look exactly like this. Scenario 1. 3I. Atlas is an extraordinarily unusual natural object. The anomalies are processes we haven't identified yet. The signal is misinterpreted noise. CSEP was activated out of caution. The silence is bureaucratic overcaution. Eventually a report is published and this becomes a footnote. I give this scenario its full weight. Science has found natural explanations for anomalies before. Scenario 2. 3I. Atlas is an artifact of non-human technological origin, a probe, a vessel. Transmitting a signal we're beginning to detect but not yet understand, not hostile. Observing. The governments of the world know this and are in the middle of the most delicate information management operation in history, trying to figure out how to tell 8 billion people something that will permanently alter their understanding of their place in the universe. Scenario 3. 3I Atlas has a purpose. The approach is deliberate. The signal is a communication or a warning or something we don't have a framework to understand. And the reason the silence is so complete and so coordinated is not because they're managing the disclosure of a wonder, it's because what they're sitting with frightens them. The evidence we have access to is inconsistent with Scenario 1, which means we're looking at Scenario 2 or 3, and I think you understand why that matters. Eugene Cernan was the last human being to stand on the moon. As he climbed back into the lunar module, he said, "We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind." What he didn't say was what he heard in those final hours on the surface. The pattern in his earpiece. The signal that pulsed every 17 seconds from somewhere beyond the solar system. He kept that with him for 44 years, and then he died. 3I. Atlas is not going to let us keep it quiet the same way. It's still here. The signal is still transmitting. The protocol is still active. And there are too many people watching now for a 4-minute gap to swallow this story whole. The next video goes into the Sigma 7 file, what we know about what's inside it, who has tried to access it, what happened to the researcher who came closest to getting it declassified in 2003. That story alone changes how you see this entire situation. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And tell me in the comments which thread you want pulled first, the Sigma 7 file, the 2006 unnamed object, the UN emergency session, or the decoded structure of the 1/7-second signal. Because whatever 3I Atlas is and whatever it's telling us, you deserve to know. And I'm not stopping until we do.